Hi everyone and welcome to this new video. In this video I want to talk about VPN providers. Specifically, I want to analyze the marketing claims made by VPN providers to see if they are true or not. So that's the idea, because most of the times here on YouTube when someone talks about VPN, the scenario that is depicted is something as follows. So you are connecting to a public Wi-Fi, for example, if you are in a cafe or in a hotel, in a restaurant, somewhere, maybe in vacation, in an airport, wherever you are, there is a public Wi-Fi, you connect to it, and then this sort of like marketing claims, the advertisements, what do they say? They say, well, in those situations, you could be attacked by other people. Your data is at risk. There is a real threat on your data, and to protect from that threat, you need to use a VPN. So you need to buy our products, you need to subscribe to our service. VPN providers provide VPN services, and they are like, if you want to browse internet securely, you need to buy our products. So that's the general idea. Now, the technical experience community, of course, knows that this is not true. This video indeed is not for the technical oriented, because if you already know that this is not true, then this video is not for you. This video is for those people who wonder how true this is. Like, is this threat really there? Is it like a real threat or is it not? Is it just a marketing claim made in order to sell you a product? And in this video we will analyze this, and the conclusion at which we will arrive through technical demos, because here I prepare some technical demo where we will analyze the traffic that is seen on the wire, on the network interface. So we will try to understand what a real attacker is able to see and do, essentially. And we will arrive at the conclusion that most of the marketing claims with respect to security are simply false. They are not true, and they are not true because security in the internet and in the web is already handled by a network protocol called TLS, Transport Layer Security. Now, this protocol has been standardized and has seen various changes throughout the year, and the latest version, TLS 1.3, V1.3, is one of the most secure network protocols ever. And this is because a lot of researchers have spent a lot of time in order to understand the weak points and improving them over the course of various years. So at this point in time, in 2024, the internet security is not guaranteed by VPNs. It's actually guaranteed by TLS, which in the context of the web is displayed as HTTPS. And we will discuss the difference between HTTP and HTTPS. And the idea here is that if you are, for example, at a public Wi-Fi, but you connect to an HTTPS website, then even if there is someone malicious in your network, he will only be able to see the encrypted traffic. Unless he steals your encryption keys, which is not easy because he needs access to the device, unless he does that or he breaks cryptography, which once again is not easy because it is an active research problem, breaking the TLS protocol, well, unless he does those things, then the data is actually pretty safe and you do not need a VPN. So to begin, we can start to analyze those marketing claims in more detail. And my plan is to just read those marketing claims and then analyze the truth or the falseness of each one of them. So these claims are taken, I've took them from a Tom Scott video. This video is really funny and you should go and watch it. I will put a link in the description. This is the video. This video is sponsored by VPN. So here there's no VPN, and in this video Tom Scott tries to make an honest advertisement for VPN services. And since this is honest, it's not sponsored by any VPN providers. It's a really ironic and funny video. So I will put a link in the description. So in this video Tom Scott makes these claims. The first one, and of course these are like in this ironic video, right? But actually you often hear about these claims. So they reflect the general sort of like advertisement that you would see regarding VPN services. So the first one is that without a VPN, Anytime you connect to free Wi-Fi in a hotel or cafe, you are risking people stealing your passwords, your banking details, and your private data. So of course, this is the one that attracts the most emotional response from the viewer. Because once again, we have to distinguish between people who are technically aware and know the details of network security and network protocols, and maybe for those people this claim they understand that it's simply false, but there are a lot of other people who, for no fault of their own, simply do not know anything about network security and network protocols. Now, if you are one such people and you hear that if you connect to a public Wi-Fi, your data is at risk, you might be scared, and this might lure you into buying a VPN services even though you don't actually need it. And the most important thing about this claim is that it is the most false one. This is simply false. It's not true. Your data is not at risk if you pay careful attention to the protocol you are using to connect to the various services on the internet. Specifically, we will see later 2 demos in which I will show a login form in HTTP and a login form in HTTPS. And we will see that any communication that happens in HTTP is unsecure. It means that everyone can see the data, which means also a malicious attacker. So yes, in the context of HTTP, it is true that if you connect to a public Wi-Fi, someone could see your data. But the point is that this thing does not happen anymore because banks, financial institutions, e-commerce applications, and any sort of service on the web that deals with sensitive data has long adopted HTTPS. And with HTTPS, the idea is that you have the TLS protocol underneath that deals with all the security aspect. So even if you intercept an HTTPS connection, you still cannot see the data unless you break TLS encryption. So this is one of the most important things. Also, the problem with this sort of advertisement is that it focuses only on the communication channel that is happening. So anytime we have a digital communication between, for example, a smartphone and a server, or like a computer, a desktop computer and a server, we actually have 3 components, which is the client. So here we have the device, the client device. Here we have the server. So here we have the server. And then, of course, there is the communication channel between this client and the server, com channel. So the idea is that most VPN providers, they just focus on the communication channel, while in reality, for today's standards, the communication channel is actually a solved problem, I would say. I mean, not really like completely 100% solved, but the TLS security, the security that TLS gives to the communication channel is extremely high. And most of the attacks that take place in the web either happen on the client side or on the server side, but typically they do not involve the communication channel. Attacks that involve the communication channels typically are sophisticated, maybe state-sponsored attacks that target specific individuals, not like a general person who has done nothing particular in their life and just wants to protect their data. So this is a key aspect, and this channel is protected thanks to TLS. So this means that if you think that a VPN will just solve all your security problems, well, you are delusional essentially, because you are missing these 2 aspects. But of course, given that all these advertisements, they just focus on selling you a product essentially, they just focus on the communication channel, they forget these other 2 aspects of the communication which are really critical. Because for example, if the server you are connecting to has been maliciously attacked or is a malicious server, then you still have the risk of people stealing your data. Or if someone has planted malicious code in your client, once again, you have the real risk of people stealing your data. So this threat, the threat of people stealing your data, is not a fake threat. The problem is that VPNs do not solve this problem at all. They really add nothing to the security of your system. And if you protect your client, you are careful on the server you connect to, then like you solve most of the potential issues that you will find in your time online. So this is the first claim, and we will see with technical demos that this is simply false. Continuing, most advertisements say that VPNs use military grade encryption. So it's sort of like, whoa, military grade, it seems like something very, very important. Is this the case? Well, in actuality, this difference, the difference between military and commercial in the context of digital encryption actually does not make sense anymore. And this is a really peculiar thing that happened in history and in the time of today, essentially. Because, for example, let's go back in the past, in 1930, like 1935, around that area. There was the Enigma machine. The Enigma machine. This machine later was used by the German army to protect their communication. So it was an encryption machine that they used to encrypt their communication before they sent it over the radio channels. Now, with Enigma, what actually happened historically was that the first version of the Enigma was not military. It was a commercial machine, and it was oriented for industries. So, for example, you have your industry product, you want to sort of protect the communication that happens between your employees for industry espionage, and so they built this Enigma machine that they sold mostly to commercial entities. At some point, the German army saw the machine, improved it, and made it a military machine. So in that historical context, there was a difference between commercial encryption and military encryption. But now, today, in 2024, in the digital era, where security is done through cryptography, through digital cryptography made with mathematical schemes and things like that, this is no longer true. It is no longer true that there is a difference between what an e-commerce uses to protect their data and what the US military uses to protect their data. We have access, and some of the most important algorithms have been standardized, like for example AES. There are different versions of AES, like the one with 2056 bits. So this is, for example, a block cipher that anyone can use, commercial, military, and stuff like that, and it is secure. It means that no one so far has found an easy way to break this block cipher. So that's the idea, like there is no difference. So specifying that VPN use military grade encryption means nothing. It's just to throw salt in the eyes, because essentially it's the same as saying commercial grade encryption, because nowadays encryption has been standardized. So everyone has the same level of security. Now, of course, maybe governments, maybe military, maybe special institution can have more information on how those things work. Maybe they can have some backdoor or stuff like that. We don't know clearly. We do not know the potential of these institutions. But the point is that through the scientific community and publicly, what is known is that the most important and robust algorithm can be used by everyone, and they've been standardized. So it is important to not forget the progress that has been made by humanity on this area, by the scientific community, by open source implementation and things like that, the open source effort, because it's not like VPN have a special technology internal. They just use open source stuff, standardized stuff, and they put a price on it because they provide this service to you. So these third and fourth claims have to do with privacy. So this third is like a VPN stops your internet service provider spying on what you're doing online, and a good VPN does not keep any logs of who you're talking to. So all of this discussion now is about privacy. It is not about security, and there is a difference. Privacy is like, what kind of data do they have access on me, over me? And of course, if this data is way too sensitive, it becomes a security issue. However, if this data, for example, is what kind of website you are connected to, so for example, are you connecting to Facebook or to Google? If you just know the domain, this does not, in my eyes anyways, become a security problem. It becomes a privacy problem. Like, this user is connected to this website. It's not a security threat, but it is a privacy potentially threat. So the idea is, once again, what kind of information do people have access to when they connect with TLS? Well, there is one single information that people can still access, and this is exactly the domain name you're connecting to. So when you connect, for example, to a specific domain, in the TLS encrypted packets, there is an early, like a series of messages, which is called the TLS handshake. And this early series of messages, which are used to set up the encryption for protecting the data, there is only the leak of information is only on the server name, on the domain name of the server. And this is put in a special package called SNI, Server Name Identification, and we will see later in the technical demo. So the only bit of information that the internet service provider sees when you're connecting to an HTTPS site is the server name. So at this point you have to ask yourself, okay, what happens when I subscribe to a VPN service? So the idea is that this is you, this is your ISP, this is the internet, so this is the ISP. Actually, let me redraw because I draw very bad. So this is you. Let's say this is me. This is my ISP. This is the internet, like the cloud of the internet. And this is the VPN. So when you're subscribed to a VPN services, what happens is that you still pass through the ISP, so physically you do a first round to connect to the VPN, and then the VPN connects you back to the internet, to the site that you actually wanted to access. So the idea is that now the information regarding you that wanted to access a specific website, the ISP no longer sees the domain name of the website you're connecting to. Why? Because it sees the domain name of the VPN. So it sees that you are trying to connect to a VPN. So this is the idea essentially. At this point, you connect to the VPN and then the VPN connects you to the website of interest. Now, is this safer or not safer? Well, what you're doing is you are changing the place where you put your trust. Like this is just a matter of trust. We don't know what's going on, of course. We can have more or less assurances, but at the end of the day, we have to place our trust somewhere to access internet services. In the default system, we place trust on the internet service provider. We typically do not choose it, it's just by default. When you subscribe to a VPN, it is on the VPN that you are putting the trust. Now, they say that they don't keep any logs of who you're talking to, but at this point, of course, the thing is, do I really know this is the case? Maybe they sell the data, maybe they do something like that, like we don't really know. I'm not sure if it has been, if there are like clear documentation regarding this matter, but ultimately the idea is this, you are just exchanging trust. So it is not safer, it just, you have a different place of trust. You choose to trust the VPN more than the ISP. So this is what you do. Maybe it's a wise choice, maybe it's not, it depends on your situation. It depends of course on the ISP you have and on the VPN you want to change to. So like it's really complex issue. It's not as simple as use a VPN and it will make things more secure and more privacy oriented. It is actually not that simple. It's a really complicated matter. And finally, but once again, even though this is a matter of privacy, it has nothing to do with security. It does not increase your security whatsoever. If anything, it can slightly increase your privacy, but only if you choose to trust your VPN provider. It is not a guarantee. And finally, if you use a VPN, you can connect to streaming services all around the world as if you were in those countries. So most people actually use VPNs not to increase their security, but to swap IP address. Because with a VPN, you are going into the internet not with your IP that was assigned by your ISP, but rather by the IP that is assigned to the VPN, by the VPN IP address. So, and for example, if you come out with an IP address that is from an America server, maybe you can access the Netflix America version, so like the American films that are on Netflix. If you go outside with like, I don't know, some other sort of IP address, an Australian IP address, then you have access to the Netflix catalog in Australia. But once again, is this something to do with security? No, this is like to act as a proxy. Technically, a VPN is not a proxy, but essentially it just swaps your IP with a different IP so you can access to different services. It has nothing to do with security, it's just a matter of accessing different services, and to be honest, I don't even think it's allowed by the terms of contracts of these services. So I mean, you can do it, but it's not really that allowed, and maybe some services try to take precaution from doing this. So at this point, we have analyzed all these different marketing claims that are made by VPN providers, and we were able to come to the conclusion that either they are false, like this one, no longer relevant anyways, because they are only relevant in an HTTP world, but then the point also is assuming that you want to connect to an HTTP server, right? So you want to connect to an HTTP server. So this is you. This is your ISP, and this is the HTTP server in the internet. So this is the internet. You connect to an HTTP service. There is no encryption because you do not share encryption keys between the client and the server. There's no encryption, so anyone can see your data. If you are in a public Wi-Fi, there is an access point here maybe, and then everyone can see the communication between the access points. So just the communication isn't clear. Okay, but now, suppose that you keep the same unsecure HTTP service, web service, and now you use a VPN, right? You introduce a VPN here. Okay, maybe you first connect to the VPN through your ISP, and this connection is actually secure, right? So the connection you go to the VPN server is secured by cryptography, by normal cryptography that everyone can use. However, the problem is that if the service you're trying to connect is HTTP, at some point the VPN has to make once again an HTTP connection, which means that once again this connection is not secure anymore. So you're just changing the place where this is not secure. Instead of being all over the connection, you have a part that is secure, but then another part that is not secure any longer. This means that in the only cases where this threat is actually real, you are still being attacked even if you use a VPN, because anyone can see the data from the VPN server to the HTTP service. So this is the idea. Of course, I'm not saying that VPNs are useless. This is obviously not the case. What I'm saying rather is that they do not increase your security. They are specific tools used for specific use cases, but not just to increase security. It does not make sense to talk like that. So at this point, I want to show some demos that I prepared. So the idea is that I prepared two codes, one that showcases a login form in HTTP, and this is written in Node.js. It's a really simple application. We just require some libraries, we put some middleware, we don't really care about that. We create a server that listens to the port 3000, and then we define this API endpoint, the /login, that is accessible with an HTTP post. This takes two parameters in the body, which is the username and the password, and it simply prints them to the console. So the functionality of the application, this is just a stub, it really does nothing useful. However, what's useful about this is that let's activate the server. So let's activate the server with node. So I do node HTTP server, HTTP login. And so at this point I can see this simple login form. This is extremely simple HTML. There is some style and there is a simple form with a username and password, extremely simple. So what's the point of this demo? In this demo I want to showcase the traffic that is generated by this application and that can be seen within the network. So it's gonna simulate any scenario in which, for example, you are in a public Wi-Fi and you connect to an HTTP site. So the URL here, notice this, is HTTP, and if you click here it says this connection is not secure because it is HTTP. Therefore, in this type of connection you should not send any sensitive data because that data can be leaked if someone captures the traffic. So how can you use this? For example, you can say test and secret. So the username in test, the password is secret. I sent this, it replies with OK, and look, this is the log of the server. So the server writes to the standard output the username and the password. So this is all cool, but the point of this demo is not to show client and server, but rather to show what happens in the communication channel. So to actually analyze the data that is happening on the network interface, we use a tool which is called Wireshark. So this is the tool. It's a very famous tool for analyzing packets, Wireshark. And how do we use this? Well, we specify a specific interface. In this case, it's going to be the loopback interface. Why do I choose this? Because the loopback interface is the local interface where this application is running. So notice that no packets are running here for now. Now, when I refresh the page here, notice what happens. we get a bunch of messages. So these are the packets that are captured by a potential attacker, essentially. This is the idea. When we connect to a public Wi-Fi, we send this data in the network. The attacker has access to this data. So in this case, we see TCP, HTTP. So we see two types of packets, TCP packets and HTTP packets. The idea is that thanks to TCP packets, we are able to establish a connection point-to-point in the network between our client and our server. So first TCP established this point-to-point connection, and after that the HTTP protocol comes in, which is used to actually exchange application data. So this is the useful data we are exchanging with the server. So TCP is sort of like metadata just for establishing the connection. HTTP is where the juicy data is contained. So for example, in this case, it was just the GET request used to fetch the page. So notice here, when we analyze this Wireshark, we see a bunch of different stacks here. These are all the different message protocols within this single message. Because actually, internet works with a layer of protocols. It is a stack of protocols where each protocol includes another protocol, essentially. So the HTTP is the latest one included in this. And here you can see the bytes. Here you can see essentially all these bytes, and here you can see the ASCII representation. So these are the hexadecimal bytes, and this is the ASCII representation of those bytes, which in this case, for example, is a GET request. Now, when we actually log in, so we put test and secret, notice what happens. I say login. Here we see other messages, and notice this. We have captured a post/login, an HTTP message with post/login. This seems interesting, right? Let's zoom in a bit further. What do we see in this bunch of data? We see, okay, HTTP that includes a form in HTML. We open this form and notice what do we get? We get our credentials, we get the test and secret, we get the password and we get the username. So all of the data has been sent in plain text. Everyone can see them. So in this scenario, yes, we are vulnerable because we are connecting to an HTTP site, and the problem, of course, is not just connecting to an HTTP site. The problem is giving sensitive data to an HTTP site with an HTTP connection, which means with no TLS. So this is the real issue. It's not the fact that we are connecting to a website, it's the fact that we are using an insecure protocol and we are sending sensitive data. Now, how do we fix this, right? Can this be fixable? Well, first of all, as I said, a VPN here will not really help, because with a VPN, we will go to the VPN server, and that connection would be encrypted. But then the VPN server would make the same packet towards this vulnerable server. So the idea is that at the end of the day, someone is still able to see this sensitive data in clear text. So even in this context, a VPN is not really useful. So how do we deal with this? Well, I prepared the second demo, this HTTPS demo essentially. So what's the idea with respect to like the code, for example? So let's analyze the code, HTTP, and then we have HTTPS. So this is the new code. Now this new code with respect to the previous one is extremely similar. We are still defining an endpoint/login which prints out username and password. We are still listening to the 3000 port. However, this time we are creating on top of the HTTP server, we are creating an HTTPS layer. And to create this layer, essentially, we have to use two special data, which is a private key and a certificate. And as we will talk later, these are used to prove the authenticity of the web server we are connecting to. But apart from this, the code itself is the same. What changes now is the communication channel that is used. Because at this point, what happens is we have point A and point B. A is our client, B is our server. First, TCP creates a point-to-point connection between A and B. Then TLS creates an encrypted session between A and B. And in the creation of this encrypted session, encryption keys are exchanged between A and B, and they are also like both parties have the same keys, so they are able to encrypt the data, to give integrity to the data, and to grant the authenticity, the authentication of the server and of the client if you want to. So the idea is that a lot of things happen in this creation of the session, and then once the session has been created, at this point you can exchange HTTP messages. So the HTTP messages will first be encrypted and then sent into the TCP tunnel. So this is the idea. In terms of code, we just do the same, just that right now we just have to say HTTPS login, but it's the same. I can clear this. Now I'm gonna refresh the page, and it says, look, the page did not send any data. Why is this the case? Because the URL we were using essentially, it was, as we saw, it was HTTP, right? If we want to use HTTPS, we have to specify in the URL HTTPS, so that the browser will use different protocols to connect to the server. So now I'm gonna log in with HTTPS. Notice what happens. So here a bunch of messages have been sent between client and server. We find once again TCP, but now we do not see directly HTTP, but rather we see TLS. So this is already different. Now the application itself is the same. It's just that right now we say this connection is secure. So the browser tells us that the connection is secure. And here it says the certificate is valid. So information about the certificate. But I mean, as I said, the application is the same. We still have this login form and we can still send our test and secret username and password. So we send this. Here in the server it receives them correctly and it prints them test and secret, and here we capture the traffic, and now I can stop essentially. So here we capture the traffic and now we can try to analyze, well, is the credential still visible by anyone over the network? Well, the idea is that it is no longer visible. And why is this the case? Because the application data here is encrypted, so the application data of TLS contains the HTTP messages in an encrypted form. And indeed, if we zoom into the application data message, and here down below you can see the encrypted content. So these are encrypted bytes. And if you see their ASCII representation here, so essentially just look at this, right? The ASCII representation is nonsense, is meaningless, cannot be interpreted. This is not HTTP. Why? Because this is encrypted HTTP. And we no longer see what kind of resource we are accessing, what kind of data we are sending. So for example, I suspect that the first application data is to fetch the page, while the second application data is to actually send the login request with the data. So this data, where are our username and password? I mean, they are here, for sure they are here. However, they have been encrypted, and therefore, even if a malicious actor on a Wi-Fi, on a public Wi-Fi network, sees this, he cannot understand what is the username and password unless he's able to decrypt this stuff. And to decrypt this stuff, he needs to have access to the session key used to encrypt. So he needs to sort of like break into the device, which is not really easy. I mean, they would have to steal it from you or stuff like that, which would be a problem in and of itself. So before moving on, let's now discuss about privacy and the sort of like remaining information that still can be learned by analyzing this TLS stuff. So as you can see here in the client hello, which is the first message that is sent by the client in order to establish the TLS session. Oh, and by the way, I've made a video on TLS on my channel. It's one of my first video. I will put a link down in the description. So if you want full detail over that, you can just check out that video. So in this first message, you can see this SNI equal localhost. So SNI is a so-called TLS extension. Specifically, it stands for Server Name Identification, and it contains the domain that we are trying to access. Why was this added? It was added in order to deal with the virtual host mechanism, and I've made a video about virtual host enumeration. So the idea is that in order to the web server to know which virtual host to serve for this TLS connection, he has to specify the virtual host in the SNI value. So this is why it's added here. And if we check the handshake protocol in the client hello, we check all the different extensions. At some point, we see the server name. So this one, server name equal localhost. So this is the server name equal localhost. So we have access to this information. but essentially that's it. That's the only leak of data that happens with TLS. It's just the domain name. It is not the data of the HTTP request. It is just the fact that we are trying to connect to localhost. If I was trying to connect to Facebook, here would appear facebook.com or stuff like that. And also, there is an extension of TLS which allows to encrypt even the server name identification. So even this thing is encrypted. So this is like something you can do, for example. And so this means that even from a point of view of privacy, it's not like VPN give you all this extra privacy. They just maybe make sure that the ISP, your internet service provider, does not see this single thing. And so at this point, how would an honest advertisement look like? So once again, this is taken from Tom Scott video, which you should just watch. And it says, unless you are being personally targeted by well-founded hackers using exploits that the world doesn't know about yet, it doesn't make your password and financial data any more safe, because they are already pretty safe. And if you are targeted by hackers like that, you have bigger problems. I mean, the idea is pretty simple and he is able to capture it very well, because the idea is, look, if your TLS connection is under threat, this means that you are really being attacked by like state-sponsored hackers, by well-funded hackers. Like, it's something that does not really happen. I mean, the TLS protocol, of course, it is a research problem. A lot of researchers every day are trying to break it. Now the question is, how much can you break it and in which situations? In my previous year, I've tried to do a PhD at the University of Rome Tor Vergata, and my objective was to like analyze the security of TLS. Then I quit my PhD because it was too hard, also for the lab I was in, like it was not really working, because it was extremely hard. But in that time, I read a lot of papers that analyze the security of TLS, and the conclusion that I've reached is that the job that has been done by implementers and researchers and just organizers regarding the TLS, standardizer regarding the TLS, has been very, very phenomenal. They've done an amazing job to making it extremely secure. The last two versions, which are TLS v1.2 and especially TLS v1.3, these are extremely amazing protocols, especially the last one, and they are very, very robust. So it's not like, I mean, VPN cannot compare with that kind of quality in terms of standardization and things like that. And so the idea is this. If you are wondering whether or not you need a VPN to increase your network security, then the fact that you are wondering is in itself a sign that you probably don't need a VPN. What you need, however, is to be careful of phishing attacks. Why? Because as I said initially in the video, the communication channel is not the only aspect to take care of. The server you're connecting to is an extremely important aspect to keep your security, to keep your data safe. Because if you are connecting to a scam, to a phishing website that tries to look like a good website, then this is a problem. And in this context, we can talk a little bit about HTTPS certificates. So what's the idea here? Notice that when I connected to this website here, it said your connection is secure because the certificate is valid. Now, when we talk about HTTPS certificates, we are talking about a means that has been developed by the community in order to verify the authenticity of web servers and also of clients, although typically certificates are mostly used to authenticate web servers. So what's the idea here? Well, I'm gonna make it like understandable by everyone, so I'm gonna skip some technical details, but the general idea is this, the intuition is this. This is me, this is my browser, so here I'm using my browser, this is the representation of my browser. Now here I have some information, this is really crucial information. Now I'm gonna use this information in order to verify if I'm connecting to the valid web servers and web applications. So the idea is that I want to connect to Facebook. So here I say, look, facebook.com. And then this server replies to me and says, oh, look, I'm facebook.com. But of course, do I trust this? Do I trust this reply? Could this be like an attacker that is trying to pretend to be Facebook? So the idea is this. I'm gonna prepare a challenge for this server and I'm gonna check the response to this challenge. So I prepare a challenge in the initial client hello and the server replies with me with like the response to this challenge, and then I use my information stored to check if the response is valid. If the response is valid, then I say, okay, this is the good server, it has been properly authenticated and stuff like that. If the response is not valid, then I say, look, you are not the real Facebook.com. I don't trust you yet. And of course, this is done through certificates. So the server essentially proves that he owns a specific certificates. And the information that I have on my browser can be used to check that proof. So this is the idea. Of course, the security of this model depends on the fact that no one is able to steal Facebook keys, private keys, and that my information here is not modified by any malicious attackers. So there are a bunch of technical assumptions you have to make in order to make this model work. It can be attacked, it's not perfect, but in most of the times it works pretty well. And so this stuff has to do with certificates. So for example, in my demo here, I can remove this green, I can remove these files, and I can read another set of keys and certificate, and I can just restart the server. So the only thing I change here is that instead of reading one certificate, I'm reading another certificate. Now, if I refresh the page here, notice what happens. Suddenly, the browser is saying, look, this connection is not secure. Now, why is it the case? It's the case because now, with the information that my browser has, it is not enough to prove that this web server is who it says it is. So in this case, it would be localhost. So because the information I have is just not enough to prove this. So even if technically the bytes of the certificates are correct, I don't have enough information to prove that he owns the private key of that certificate. So this is a bit technical. It's just to say that if you see this, what is happening underneath is that encryption and integrity are still provided. So like no one can see the data, no one can modify the data. However, you are not really sure if you are connecting to the right website, to the right web server or web application. So this is all to say, to like go to a conclusion, is that this warning things has only to do with authentication. However, let's go back to the good certificates, right? So the fact that right now I don't have any certification issue does not mean that the web application is safe. It just means that the web application owns the correct keys for the correct certificate. That's it. So for example, most phishing attacks, how do they do them? They do them not by obtaining, for example, the private key of Facebook.com, but by generating a new private key for a different domain. Maybe facebook.com with three O's, with a different domain. So you're not really stealing the private key of the facebook.com domain in order to generate a valid facebook.com certificate. Rather, you are using, for example, services such as Let's Encrypt in order to generate a certificate for a different domain. Now, Let's Encrypt allows you to generate certificates for custom domains, so you have to be really, really careful over the domain you are connecting. And so this means that security is not handled automatically by a VPN. You have to pay attention to the domain you are connecting to, you have to pay attention to the protocol you are using, and you have to pay attention to secure your local browser, your local data, to make sure that you do not install malware that could compromise your internal data. And so to finish off the video, the idea is that to be safe on the internet, you have to make sure that you always use HTTPS communication. The fact that the domains you're connecting to are valid, they are not like fake domains or phishing domains, and that your device is not compromised. Now, not all the times those are easy stuff to do. Sometimes they can be tricky. For example, your website, the web application can be configured badly in a way that some communication happens with HTTPS and some with HTTP. This is when a penetration test can analyze the security of a web application, also with respect to how it enforces a correct communication channel. the domains can be tricky, understanding if your device has been compromised can be tricky, but this is the point. Sometimes security is tricky. There is no easy solution. You just have to learn where to pay attention. It's not like you're gonna buy a service and your security problems will be solved. This is not the case. But the cool thing is that there is a protocol, the TLS protocol is extremely robust. Oh, and also, I was forgetting this. This is the request for comment for the version 1.3 of the TLS protocol, and it is an extremely complex document which documents how encryption and security should be guaranteed for any sort of communication that happens in the internet and in the web. This is the results of decades of work from the most top researchers in the world in applied cryptography. So this is really like an achievement of humanity, and we have to be happy about this. We do not need VPN providers to increase security because security has been taken care of by the TLS protocol, and this is an extremely important thing. You can use VPN for other stuff, but not really to increase your security. So I hope the video was interesting. If you have any comments, leave them in the description, and see you to the next video.